I'm Eliza Matthews, 32 years old, and despite building a successful career in finance, I've never been good enough for my father. The annual family reunion dinner was approaching, and I dreaded it more than usual this year. I had bought him a luxury car as a peace offering, hoping things would be different. Little did I know that in my purse was a document that would change everything. By the end of the night, I would finally understand why my father never loved me. Before I share my story, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever stood up to someone who refused to see your worth. Trust me, my story might give you the courage you need too. Growing up in an affluent Boston suburb, our family appeared picture-perfect to outsiders, but behind closed doors, things were very different. My father, Richard Matthews, built his real estate development company from moderate beginnings into a multi-million-dollar corporation. He valued success, status, and respect above all else, including family relationships. From my earliest memories, he was never the kind of father who attended school plays or helped with homework. Instead, he was the harsh critic who pointed out my B-plus grades should have been A's, who questioned why I wasn't chosen as team captain, who reminded me that second place was just the first loser. My mother, Caroline, was his opposite in many ways, warm and affectionate when he wasn't around, but she became a different person in his presence, almost shrinking into herself, never contradicting him, never standing up for us kids when his criticism went too far. It was a dynamic I didn't fully understand until I was much older, this strange power he held over her, the way her eyes would dart to him before she answered even simple questions about dinner plans or weekend activities. My siblings and I grew up within this complicated family structure. My older brother James was 3 years my senior and undeniably the golden child. He played football, made the honor roll, dated the right girls from the right families, and eventually followed our father into the real estate business after graduating from father's alma mater. Everything came easily to James, or at least that's how it appeared to me. He seemed to intuitively understand what would please our father, while I constantly guessed wrong. My younger sister Sophia, 2 years behind me, somehow managed to navigate the murky waters of our father's approval system better than I ever could. She wasn't the overachiever that James was, but she had a natural charm and an almost supernatural ability to read the room, to know when to speak and when to fade into the background. She became the family peacemaker, the one who could occasionally make father laugh when his mood darkened, the one who would slip into my room after particularly brutal criticism sessions to assure me that it wasn't as bad as it seemed. But for me, nothing was ever enough. I graduated top of my class in high school, secured a full academic scholarship to Cornell, while father pushed for me to attend his alma mater instead, seeing my choice as a rejection of his legacy. During college, I worked 2 part-time jobs, while maintaining my GPA, yet during breaks he'd question why I wasn't interning at more prestigious companies. After graduation, I refused his half-hearted offer to work at his company, knowing I'd never be seen as anything but a pity hire. Instead, I moved to New York City, with nothing but 2 suitcases and determination, sleeping on a friend's couch while applying to every financial firm I could find. When I finally landed an entry-level position at Goldman Sachs, his response was, "Let's see if you last a month." I did last, not just a month, but 8 years, working my way up without family connections or nepotism, fueled partly by passion but also by a desperate need to prove him wrong. Just last month, I'd received a major promotion to senior investment strategist, becoming the youngest person in the firm's history to hold the position. The salary bump was substantial, allowing me to finally buy my dream apartment in Manhattan and still have savings left over. It was with those savings that I made what I thought would be a grand gesture, purchasing a brand new Mercedes S-Class for my father for Father's Day. In my fantasy, this gift would finally make him see me as successful, as worthy of his approval. The car cost nearly a year's salary, but I convinced myself it would be worth it to finally hear him say he was proud of me. Looking back now, I can see how pathetic that need for validation was, how it had shaped every major decision in my life. My achievements weren't truly for me, but were weapons in an unwinnable war for his affection. When I bought that car, I wasn't just buying a luxury vehicle, I was trying to buy what every child deserves freely, a parent's unconditional love. The annual Matthews family reunion always fell on the last weekend in June, conveniently close to Father's Day. which meant the gathering doubled as a celebration of Richard Matthews's patriarchal status. This year would be no different, except that I had made the decision to finally stand out by purchasing that ridiculously expensive luxury car, a sleek black Mercedes S-Class with all the premium features Father had once mentioned admiring at a country club friend's home. As the date approached, my anxiety spiraled to new heights. I spent 3 weekends shopping for the perfect outfit, something that screamed successful but not trying too hard, feminine but not frivolous, the contradictory mix my father seemed to expect from women in business. I settled on a navy blue, tailored dress from a designer my mother mentioned he respected, with subtle gold jewelry and shoes that were expensive but not flashy. The familiar pattern of preparation felt pathetic, even as I participated in it, the desperate routine of a child still seeking approval at 32. Past reunions flashed through my mind as I packed, each one marked by some form of paternal disappointment. When I was 16 and won the state math competition, he'd questioned why I wasn't focusing more on debate since numbers people are easy to find. When I graduated college summa cum laude, his only comment was that my chosen field was unstable compared to real estate. My first bonus at Goldman resulted in him wondering aloud if finance was really just glorified gambling, and my first promotion led to questions about whether I'd been selected to fill a gender quota. Nothing was ever an achievement on its own merits, always tainted by his skepticism. But this year carried an additional complication, one that had rocked the foundations of my identity just 3 months earlier. A popular genetic testing service, one I'd used out of simple curiosity about my ancestry, had revealed something unexpected. The genetic markers didn't align with being Richard Matthews's biological daughter. After the initial shock and disbelief, I'd quietly pursued a more definitive test, obtaining DNA samples from my father's hairbrush during a brief visit home. The results were conclusive and sat now in a sealed envelope in my purse, a nuclear option I hadn't decided whether to deploy. The discovery explained so much: the lifelong feeling of being an outsider in my own family, the subtle physical differences no one acknowledged, the inexplicable coldness from a man who showed at least basic affection to his other children. I suspected he knew, had always known, and that knowledge had colored every interaction we'd ever had. The day before the reunion, I drove the new Mercedes to my parents' suburban Boston home, having arranged for delivery to a nearby dealership. I'd planned the presentation carefully, arriving mid-afternoon when Mother would be at her garden club meeting, ensuring a private moment for this peace offering. My father answered the door in his usual crisp, business-casual attire, despite it being a Saturday, looking mildly annoyed at the interruption. "Eliza, you're early. The reunion isn't until tomorrow," he said, checking his watch as if I'd missed an appointment. "I know, Dad. I actually brought your Father's Day gift early and wanted to give it to you privately," I explained, heart pounding as I handed him a small box containing the car key with the Mercedes emblem clearly visible. He opened it with the polite, detached manner he reserved for obligatory gifts, his expression shifting to surprise as he recognized the logo. "Is this some kind of joke?" he asked, and I guided him to the front window, where the brand new car sat gleaming in the driveway. His face registered genuine shock, followed by something almost like pleasure, but it faded quickly to his usual analytical expression. "This is excessive, Eliza. What are you trying to prove?" he asked, though he was already moving toward the front door, key in hand. "Nothing," I lied. "I got a big promotion, and I wanted to do something special for you." He circled the car, twice, examining it like he might a property investment, noting features, asking pointed questions about financing and insurance that felt more like an interrogation than gratitude. After a brief test drive where he commented on the steering being a bit loose despite the car's renowned handling, he parked it in the garage rather than leaving it in the driveway where guests might see it. His thanks were perfunctory, followed immediately by a comment that I must be doing well to waste money like this, effectively cutting the legs out from under my grand gesture. That evening, I called my best friend Taylor from my hotel room, fighting back tears as I recounted the cold reception. "You know what? Forget him," Taylor said with the righteous anger of a friend who'd heard too many similar stories. "Take the car back. He doesn't deserve it." I dismissed the suggestion, still clinging to hope that tomorrow would be different, that in front of others he might show appreciation, might finally see me. "Just promise me you won't show him that test," Taylor warned before hanging up. Not unless you're prepared for nuclear fallout. I promised, but the envelope remained in my purse, a secret weapon I both feared and couldn't quite relinquish. Sunday afternoon arrived with perfect June weather, sunny with a gentle breeze, as if the environment itself was conspiring to create the illusion of the perfect family gathering. I took the long route to my parents' estate, using the drive to rehearse confident responses to the inevitable questions about my personal life, my career trajectory, my lack of a husband or children at the ancient age of 32. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel as I turned onto the familiar maple-lined driveway, already half filled with luxury cars belonging to extended family and my father's business associates, who somehow always made the invite list for supposedly intimate family gatherings. I spotted the Mercedes I'd gifted him prominently displayed near the front entrance rather than in its garage spot from yesterday, strategically positioned where arriving guests couldn't miss it. Taking a deep breath, I smoothed my dress, checked my makeup one final time, and strode toward the imposing front door with the practiced confidence I'd developed in boardrooms filled with men who underestimated me. Mother answered, her face lighting up with genuine warmth as she embraced me, whispering, "You look beautiful, darling," before adding her standard, "Your father's in the back garden with the Peterson group," as if issuing a weather warning. The grand foyer was already crowded with relatives, the usual mix of actual family and my father's carefully curated collection of connections who were treated as honorary members of the Matthews clan. Aunt Linda, mother's sister, approached, immediately with air kisses and rapid-fire questions about my love life, while Uncle George offered a hearty handshake and a booming, "There's our Wall Street wizard," which I knew would irritate my father if within earshot. Cousins, second cousins, and family friends swirled around in predictable patterns. The same conversations repeated annually with minor updates, everyone performing their assigned roles. In the Matthews family theater, my father's entrance was exactly as choreographed as I expected, walking in from the garden with 3 business associates, all laughing at something surely only moderately amusing but treated as hilarious due to the speaker's net worth. His eyes swept the room, acknowledging various guests with nods and brief greetings until landing on me. The flicker of recognition was followed by the briefest tightening of his lips before he nodded exactly as he had to distant relatives and walked toward Mother to murmur something in her ear. No particular greeting for me, his middle child, the daughter who had just gifted him an automobile worth more than most people's annual salaries. I pretended not to notice, engaged in conversation with my cousin Rachel about her medical residency, but the familiar sting of dismissal burned all the same. Mother materialized at my side moments later, touching my arm gently. "Darling, your father mentioned you brought a new car for him. How incredibly generous," she said, her eyes communicating a mixture of gratitude and concern about the extravagance. "Please come say hello to the Stevensons. They just got back from a financial conference in Singapore and would love your insights." This was Mother's way, always running interference, creating social buffers, manufacturing reasons for interactions that should come naturally between family members. James arrived fashionably late, as was his custom, making an entrance with his perfect wife Rebecca and their 2 perfect children, receiving the warm paternal embrace I'd spent decades trying to earn. "Dad, the new car is insane. When did you decide to upgrade?" he asked, and I watched in disbelief as my father clapped him on the shoulder and responded, "Sometimes you need to treat yourself, son. Success has its privileges," with no mention of the gift or my contribution. Sophia intercepted me before I could process this blatant erasure, pulling me into a genuine hug that lingered just long enough to communicate her understanding. "I heard about your promotion." "That's amazing, Liz. Seriously groundbreaking," she whispered, using my childhood nickname that no one else used anymore. Her sincerity was a balm, but the contrast with our father's indifference only highlighted the disparity. As appetizers circulated carried by hired staff, I noticed my father leading a group of his business associates toward the front drive, gesturing animatedly. Through the large bay windows, I could see him showing off the Mercedes, opening doors, pointing out features, his face alive with a pride I'd never seen directed at me. "He's been doing that all morning," Sophia murmured, appearing at my elbow, with a glass of wine that I gratefully accepted. 3 separate tours for different groups of his cronies. "Mother told me you bought it for him." That was incredibly generous, Liz. I sipped the wine, watching as my father settled into the driver's seat, inviting one of his associates to experience the passenger-side luxury. Generosity wasn't my motivation, I admitted quietly. Just once, I wanted him to see me as successful, as worthy of notice. Pathetic, right? Sophia squeezed my arm. Not pathetic. Human. But Liz, you need to understand. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Dad will never give you what you're looking for. It's not because you don't deserve it, but because he isn't capable of it. Something in him is broken when it comes to you specifically. Her words hit with surprising force, not because they were new information, but because hearing someone else acknowledge the dynamic I'd experienced my entire life made it suddenly painfully real in a way my private thoughts never had. The weight of the paternity test in my purse seemed to double, the sealed envelope a ticking bomb I both wanted to detonate and desperately hoped to contain. The hour before dinner unfolded with the predictable rhythm of Matthew's family gatherings, everyone migrating to the formal living room with its uncomfortable antique furniture and aggressively tasteful decor selected by Mother, but approved by Father in the only domestic domain where his opinion reigned supreme. I positioned myself strategically on a window seat, slightly removed from the main conversation circle, nursing a second glass of wine and observing the familiar family dynamics. With newfound clarity, the knowledge of my genetic otherness creating an almost anthropological detachment. James naturally commanded the center of attention, regaling the assembled family with tales of his latest real estate acquisition, a struggling shopping complex he planned to transform into luxury condominiums. The initial investment looked risky to my partners, but I saw the potential everyone else missed, he explained, with our father nodding approvingly from his leather armchair throne. That's the Matthews instinct, Father interjected proudly. Seeing opportunity where others see failure. It's in the blood. The irony of his statement wasn't lost on me, the phantom weight of the envelope in my purse growing heavier with each blood-related claim. The conversation shifted inevitably in my direction as James concluded his self-congratulatory monologue. Eliza, Richard tells me you've moved up at your firm, my Uncle Robert remarked, genuine interest in his voice. Senior investment strategist, isn't it? Impressive for someone your age. Before I could respond, Father cleared his throat. It's a good stepping stone position. The financial sector is volatile, though, always has been. Not like having something tangible like property. He turned toward James. Real assets withstand market fluctuations. They persist through generations. The familiar dismissal stung despite my anticipation of it, the calculated pivot back to James and real estate, the implied inferiority of my chosen career path. Actually, I began, summoning the professional voice I used in difficult client meetings, my division generated 38% returns last quarter, outperforming the market by 22 points during significant volatility. Our risk assessment model, which I developed, has been adopted company-wide. A moment of impressed silence followed before Father responded with a dismissive wave. Numbers on paper. When the next recession hits, we'll see how that holds up. He turned to his business associate. Henry, speaking of property values, what do you think of the zoning changes in the Cambridge corridor? I excused myself to refresh my drink, encountering Sophia in the hallway as she returned from checking on her husband, who was watching the children in the backyard. Don't let him get to you, she whispered, squeezing my arm. I heard about your model from Michael's cousin who works in finance. It's apparently revolutionary. Her validation warmed me even as I realized how pathetic it was to still crave such approval. As I approached the bar setup in the dining room, I overheard Father's voice drifting from his adjoining study, the door slightly ajar. The car? Yes. Quite an upgrade from the old model. When you work hard and build something from nothing like I have, you earn these luxuries. The male voice responding belonged to Walter Peterson, Father's longtime business rival and sometimes ally. Richard, you old dog, always the modest one. Your daughter Eliza mentioned she bought it for you when we chatted earlier. Said something. About her promotion. Sounds like she's making quite a name for herself in New York. A brief silence followed before Father's response, each word precisely chosen. Yes, well, the girl has always been desperate for attention. Truth is, her success comes from the opportunities I provided. Private schools, college connections, the fundamental understanding of business I instilled in all my children. The car is just her way of showing she's finally applying what I taught her. The casual erasure of my accomplishments, the rewriting of my hard-fought independence as somehow stemming from his influence when he'd offered nothing but criticism, sent a shock of anger through me so intense I nearly dropped my glass. The conversation continued, Father describing how he'd always pushed Eliza harder than the others because she needed that extra discipline, painting himself as the architect of achievements he'd actively dismissed. I retreated before being discovered, anger churning into a cold, clarifying fury. In the main hallway, James intercepted me, his expression uncharacteristically serious. Eliza, a word? He guided me toward a quiet corner near Mother's prized orchid display. Dad mentioned you've been asking Mother strange questions about her college years. What exactly are you digging for? His directness caught me off guard. In truth, after the DNA test, I had casually inquired about Mother's life before marriage, fishing for clues about possible relationships, but I'd thought my questions sufficiently subtle. Just getting to know her better, I replied carefully. Women in her generation didn't get many opportunities to build their own identities before marriage and children. James studied me with our father's analytical gaze, the family resemblance, striking in ways that now felt like further evidence of my exclusion. Look, whatever you're doing, whatever point you're trying to make with extravagant gifts and probing questions, just stop. The family has a certain order, a harmony. Don't disrupt that with whatever crisis you're manufacturing. His condescension was so perfectly echoed from Father that I almost laughed. Harmony? Is that what you call this toxic hierarchy? This system where one person's accomplishments are celebrated while another's are undermined? I'm not manufacturing anything, James. I'm just finally seeing clearly. He stepped closer, voice lowered to avoid attention. Dad has built everything we have. The Matthews name means something because of him. Your fancy job in New York, your trendy apartment, it all stems from the foundation he created. Show some respect and gratitude for once. Before I could respond, our cousin Rachel approached, seeming to sense the tension. Everything okay over here? Aunt Caroline is looking for both of you. I think dinner is about to be announced. James plastered on his public smile, the perfect son persona slipping seamlessly back into place. Just catching up with my little sister. Business talk, nothing important. As he walked away, Rachel touched my arm gently. You know, my mom always says your father plays favorites like it's an Olympic sport he's determined to medal in. For what it's worth, I think what you've accomplished on your own is pretty incredible. Her quiet support nearly broke my carefully maintained composure. I'd spent so many years convincing myself that the problem was my perception, not reality, that having someone else acknowledge the dynamic felt paradoxically both validating and devastating. The dinner bell chimed, Mother's signal for everyone to begin moving toward the formal dining room. I lingered behind, fingers brushing the outline of the envelope in my purse, weighing options, consequences, scenarios. Part of me wanted to leave immediately, to withdraw from this charade of family unity, to protect myself from the inevitable wounds the evening would inflict. But a stronger, perhaps more masochistic part refused to retreat, determined to see this through, to finally confront the lifetime of rejection with the physical evidence of its root cause. I checked the envelope one final time, confirming the test results remained safely sealed inside, then straightened my shoulders and moved toward the dining room, steeling myself for the performance ahead. The Matthews formal dining room had always struck me as a perfect metaphor for our family, with its imposing mahogany table that seated 20 people yet somehow still felt coldly impersonal. The ancestral portraits watching judgmentally from walls and the elaborate place settings that prioritized appearance over comfort, just like everything else in my father's carefully constructed world. Mother had outdone herself with the table arrangements, crystal glasses catching light from the chandelier, fresh flower centerpieces spaced precisely, name cards in perfect calligraphy assigning each guest their predetermined position in the family hierarchy. I found my card predictably far down the table, seated between Cousin Rachel's husband, whom I'd met perhaps twice, and one of Father's younger business associates, safely distanced from any meaningful conversation. James and his family occupied the prime positions near Father at the head of the table, with Sophia and her husband serving as buffers between the inner circle and lesser relations. Mother sat at the opposite end, her position a perfect illustration of her role in the family, technically equal but separated by the expanse of the table, connected yet distant. The first course arrived with military precision, waitstaff placing, delicate appetizers of seared scallops with microgreens before each guest simultaneously. Father rose, wineglass in hand, commanding immediate silence without requiring a word. "Welcome, family and friends, to our annual reunion," he began with practiced charm, his public persona polished to a glossy shine. "Each year, I'm reminded how fortunate I am to have built not just a successful business, but a legacy embodied by my family." His gaze swept proudly over James, who nodded appreciatively, then Sophia, who smiled demurely, before sliding past me as if I occupied the same visual plane as the wallpaper. "A special welcome to the Peterson Group joining us this year," he continued, acknowledging his business associates. "When surrounded by success, one naturally attracts more of the same." The toast continued with Father highlighting James's recent business expansion, Sophia's community board appointment, and ending with a pointed comment that family success comes from embracing proven pathways rather than unnecessarily challenging traditions, his eyes finally landing briefly on me with unmistakable meaning. As the meal progressed through 5 elaborate courses, Father directed conversation with subtle cues and direct questions, ensuring topics remained within his preferred domains of real estate markets, local politics where he held influence, and occasional sports discussions that inevitably highlighted James's former athletic achievements. When Mother gently attempted to mention my recent promotion during a lull, Father smoothly intercepted. "Speaking of financial markets, Henry, what's your take on the Fed's latest signals?" Effectively erasing her effort without acknowledging it had occurred. By the fish course, the familiar pattern had fully emerged, with Father periodically lobbing pointed questions in my direction, each designed to undermine rather than engage. "Eliza, your firm handles primarily domestic investments, correct? Limiting, isn't it, given the global expansion opportunities? Or, I understand your promotion came after the Davidson account. Fortunate timing that James was able to introduce you to William Davidson at last year's charity gala." Each comment carefully constructed to reframe any success as either limited in scope or dependent on family connections I had actively avoided using. I maintained the pleasant, professional demeanor I'd perfected in hostile boardrooms, refusing to show the emotional reaction he seemed determined to provoke. "Actually, Father, our international division integrated my risk assessment model last quarter, and the Davidson account came through a blind pitch competition, no introductions involved. My corrections were delivered with practiced lightness, though I noticed Sophia's sympathetic wince at each exchange, the familiar family dance painful in its predictability. The main course arrived, an unnecessarily elaborate beef Wellington that required all attention for several minutes, providing brief respite from the conversational minefield. Father used the opportunity to open another bottle of prohibitively expensive wine, his consumption steadily increasing throughout the meal, a concerning pattern that Mother tracked with nervous glances. James leaned over to mutter something in Father's ear, receiving a dismissive wave in response. As coffee and dessert were served, Father's attention swung back in my direction, alcohol having eroded what minimal filters he typically maintained. "Eliza, Richard tells me you're still single," commented Mrs. Peterson with well-meaning interest. "Such a beautiful, accomplished young woman. The men in New York must be intimidated." Before I could formulate a polite response about prioritizing career advancement, Father interjected. "Eliza has always been focused on proving something rather than building something," he said, swirling his bourbon contemplatively. "Some people chase accomplishments to fill other voids. Family requires compromise, something the Matthews women have traditionally understood better than she has." The casual cruelty landed with practiced precision, implying my professional success was compensation for personal failure rather than an achievement in its own right. Mother's sharp intake of breath was audible even from my distant table position. "Richard," she began with uncharacteristic firmness, but he continued as if she hadn't spoken. Perhaps if Eliza had shown more interest in suitable matches I introduced over the years rather than dismissing them as boring or conventional, she wouldn't be facing her 30s alone. Each word was carefully selected for maximum impact, The public dissection of my personal choices presented as paternal concern rather than the hostile critique it truly was. The familiar pressure built behind my eyes. The childhood urge to flee from the table, fighting against adult determination to maintain dignity. I took a measured sip of water, noting with detached interest that my hand remained steady despite the emotional turbulence beneath. "I appreciate your concern for my personal fulfillment, Father," I responded evenly, drawing on every negotiation technique I'd ever learned. "But as you've often emphasized, Matthew's focus on results, and my results speak for themselves." A tense silence fell over the table, relatives who had witnessed similar exchanges over the years studiously examining their dessert plates while Father's business associates shifted uncomfortably, suddenly very interested in the architectural details of the ceiling. The pressure in my chest expanded with each heartbeat, the culmination of a lifetime of these moments, these public humiliations thinly disguised as family concern, these careful erasures of my personhood and achievements. The envelope in my purse seemed to pulse with potential energy, a nuclear option I had promised myself and Taylor I wouldn't deploy. As waitstaff cleared dessert plates, I realized with perfect clarity that the current path was unsustainable, that continuing to seek approval from a man genetically programmed to withhold it was a form of self-destruction I could no longer afford. As coffee cups were being refilled and brandy offered to conclude the elaborate meal, Father pushed his chair back slightly, a signal universally understood by the gathered family as preparation for one of his impromptu speeches, a tradition that had evolved over years of Matthew's gatherings. The anticipatory silence fell immediately, conversations halting mid-sentence, silverware carefully placed down, all attention reflexively turning toward the patriarch. Father stood, brandy snifter in hand, his expression taking on the benevolent authority he reserved for these moments of public performance. "Before we disperse to the garden for our annual family photograph," he began, voice carrying that particular timbre of someone accustomed to commanding rooms, "I'd like to take a moment to express my pride in what the Matthews family continues to build together." He gestured expansively, including the business associates as honorary members of this supposed dynasty. "A family is much like a business, enterprise, requiring vision, leadership, and participants who understand their roles in creating collective success." His gaze swept the table in that practiced way of appearing to make eye contact with everyone while actually connecting with no one. "As I look around this table, I'm reminded of how fortunate I am to have children who contribute to the family legacy in meaningful ways." He turned toward James, raising his glass slightly. "James, your business acumen continues to impress not just me, but the entire Boston development community. The Riverside project represents exactly the kind of bold, forward-thinking approach that distinguishes Matthew's projects from lesser ventures. You've not only embraced the lessons I've taught you, but you've elevated them." James nodded with practiced humility that barely concealed his satisfaction, the golden child receiving his expected due. Father then shifted toward Sophia, his expression warming further. "And Sophia, your grace in balancing family responsibilities with community leadership shows remarkable maturity. Your work with the Children's Hospital Board has brought genuine prestige to the Matthews name, reminding us all that true success includes giving back. Your mother and I couldn't be prouder of the family you're raising and the values you represent." Sophia's smile was genuine, if slightly uncomfortable with the spotlight, always more comfortable facilitating others' recognition than receiving her own. I braced myself for what would inevitably come next, the careful omission, the pointed silence where my name should be, the practiced technique of praise by exclusion that would communicate volumes to everyone present without requiring explicit criticism. What happened instead was somehow worse. Father's gaze finally landed on me, the slight narrowing of his eyes betraying the calculated nature of what would follow. "As I reflect on my children's accomplishments," he continued, voice modulating, to what others might mistake for thoughtfulness rather than the prelude to attack it actually signaled, "I'm struck by how differently success can be defined." He took a deliberate sip of brandy, the theatrical pause allowing tension to build. "I'm proud of all my children," he announced, raising his glass higher, and for a suspended moment, I felt a ridiculous flutter of hope, quickly extinguished by his continuation, "except for the loser sitting at the table." The words landed with precision cruelty, followed by a beat of shocked silence before uncertain laughter rippled through the guests, most assuming this must be some inside family joke rather than the public evisceration it actually was. I felt blood rush to my face, then drain away completely, leaving a cold numbness as every eye at the table turned toward me with expressions ranging from embarrassment to pity to morbid curiosity. Father continued as if he'd made a mild joke about the weather. Some people measure success by titles and salaries, by superficial achievements that look impressive on paper, but lack substance and staying power. True success comes from continuing family traditions, from building upon foundations rather than constantly seeking to prove individual worth at the expense of collective strength. The deliberate vagueness of some people fooled no one, the target of his remarks crystalline in its clarity. Mother's face had gone completely white, her knuckles bloodless around her napkin, while James looked smugly satisfied and Sophia openly mortified. Cousin Rachel reached across her husband to touch my arm in silent support, but I barely registered the gesture. My entire consciousness narrowed to a pinpoint focus on the man at the head of the table who had just confirmed what the DNA test had already told me, that I was fundamentally separate, other, not truly part of this family in his eyes. For 20 seconds that stretched like hours, I remained frozen, experiencing the physical sensations of humiliation with clinical detachment, the burning face, the constricted throat, the accelerated heartbeat, the fight or flight response flooding my system with adrenaline. A lifetime of similar moments flashed through my consciousness, a continual slideshow of public corrections, subtle undermining, achievements reframed as failures, each building upon the last to create the summative message that I was fundamentally insufficient, unworthy of the name I carried, the name that genetic science had recently confirmed wasn't actually mine to claim. As Father concluded his speech with some platitude about family unity that rang hollow after his pointed exclusion, something shifted irrevocably within me, a final thread severing between the desperate child seeking approval and the adult woman, who suddenly saw with perfect clarity the futility of that lifelong quest. The weight of the envelope in my purse transformed from burden to liberation, its contents no longer a shameful secret, but a key unlocking the prison of false expectations. I'd occupied my entire life. The room remained suspended in uncomfortable tension, waiting for my reaction, perhaps expecting tears or a hasty exit as had happened in previous years, the predictable conclusion to the familiar family drama. Instead, I felt a strange calm descend, a clarity of purpose crystallizing around the decision that had perhaps been inevitable from the moment the test results arrived. Without fully planning the action, I found myself standing, the movement so smooth and deliberate that it commanded immediate attention, conversations halting mid-sentence as all eyes turned toward me with expressions ranging from curiosity to apprehension, the latter primarily from those who had witnessed previous Matthews family confrontations. My champagne glass remained on the table, deliberately not raised, the symbolism of my refusal to toast unmistakable. I smoothed my dress with steady hands, surprising myself with the absolute calm that had replaced the earlier turmoil, as if I'd passed through a storm into its peaceful eye. "Thank you, Father, for that illuminating speech," I began, my voice carrying clearly without effort, the professional tone I'd perfected in boardrooms serving me well in this unexpected moment. I've spent 32 years trying to earn approval. That was never going to be granted, measuring myself against standards that mysteriously shifted whenever I approached meeting them. Today, I finally understand why. The room had gone completely still, the kind of weighted silence that precedes significant moments. Mother's face a mask of alarm, while Father's expression darkened, with the recognition that this script wasn't following his expected pattern. "For those keeping score," I continued with deliberate lightness that belied the magnitude of what was coming, "I graduated top of my class from Cornell, built a career without family connections, and recently became the youngest senior investment strategist in my firm's history. By most objective measures, hardly the definition of a loser." I allowed my gaze to sweep the table, establishing brief eye contact with several relatives who nodded slightly in acknowledgement before returning my attention to Father. But success, in Richard Matthews' world, has never been about objective achievement, has it? It's about conformity to his specific vision, about reflecting glory back upon him rather than creating one's own light. I reached for my purse with deliberate calm, aware that every movement was being closely observed, the unusual spectacle of the compliant middle child finally breaking rank too compelling to ignore. "I bought you a car worth more than most people. Make in a year?" I said directly to father, whose face had settled into the cold mask he wore when business negotiations weren't proceeding to his advantage. "Not because you needed it or even particularly deserved it, but because I still harbored the childish hope that a grand enough gesture might finally bridge whatever mysterious gap has existed between us my entire life." From my purse, I withdrew the envelope containing the paternity test results, the paper now seeming almost mundane considering the weight of information it contained. "For 3 decades, I've blamed myself for your inability to show me the same affection you show James and Sophia. I've twisted myself into countless shapes trying to become whatever would finally earn your approval, never understanding that the problem wasn't in my actions but in my DNA." A collective intake of breath circled the table as the implication. Of my words registered, Mother's face draining of remaining color, while James straightened with sudden alertness. I placed the envelope precisely in the center of the table, my movements measured and deliberate. "For you, Dad. Happy Father's Day," I said with quiet finality, infusing the paternal title with all the irony the moment deserved. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked from the dining room, back straight, pace unhurried, preserving the dignity that had been systematically stripped from me throughout the evening. The shocked silence held until I reached the foyer, followed by the immediate eruption of multiple conversations, questions overlapping into unintelligible noise. I continued outside without hesitation, the evening air cool against my flushed skin, the path to the driveway illuminated by decorative lanterns that created pools of light in the gathering dusk. The Mercedes sat where Father had positioned it for maximum visibility, gleaming black paintwork reflecting the house lights, a symbol of everything I'd been trying to purchase with money that should have been invested in my own peace instead. The decision wasn't conscious so much as inevitable, my hand finding the spare key fob I'd kept in my purse, the remote unlock responding with a gentle chirp that seemed inappropriately cheerful for the moment. I slid into the driver's seat, the leather interior still carrying the new car smell mixed with the faint trace of Father's cologne, an olfactory reminder of his brief possession that would soon fade. Through the windshield, I could see figures appearing at the dining room, windows, silhouettes gesturing animatedly, the family drama now fully unleashed by my departure and revelation. The engine purred to life with expensive precision, the dashboard illuminating with welcome lights as if nothing momentous had occurred, as if this were simply another drive rather than a definitive break with 32 years of emotional servitude. As I reversed down the driveway, I caught a glimpse of the front door flying open, Father's figure framed in the light, one hand clutching what appeared to be the opened envelope, his mouth open in what might have been my name but was lost beneath. The gentle rumble of the German-engineered engine. The symmetry struck me as I accelerated away, the luxury car he had showcased to associates while minimizing my contribution now physically removed, just as he had attempted to minimize my existence for 3 decades, both acts of erasure meeting in perfect narrative balance. The realization solidified what had been intuitive action into conscious decision, the reclamation of the gift paralleling the reclamation of self-worth I was simultaneously undertaking, both unburdened by expectations of gratitude that had never been forthcoming. In the rearview mirror, the Matthews estate receded, growing smaller with each second, its grandeur diminishing with distance just as its emotional hold on me weakened with each rotation of the wheels carrying me away. The lightness spreading through my chest wasn't happiness exactly, too complex and bittersweet for such a simple label, but rather the unfamiliar sensation of freedom, of choices suddenly unconstrained by the gravitational pull of paternal approval that had distorted my orbit for as long as I could remember. The Mercedes responded with quiet precision as I navigated away from the neighborhood of my childhood, each turn creating further distance between the person I had been 30 minutes ago and whoever I was becoming now. I made it almost to the highway entrance before the first call came through on my cell phone, Sophia's name flashing on the dashboard display, followed in rapid succession by James, Mother, and several cousins, the digital evidence of chaos left in my wake. I silenced the ringer, but didn't turn the phone off completely, some part of me needing to witness the fallout even if I wasn't ready to engage with it directly. As I merged onto the highway headed toward Boston proper rather than back to New York, I allowed myself a single glance in the rearview mirror, just as a male figure I recognized as my father rushed into the street behind me, his normally composed face contorted in an expression I'd never seen before, something beyond anger into territory I couldn't immediately identify. The distance was too great to hear his voice, but I didn't need audio to recognize the scream from his body language alone, arms raised overhead in a gesture of such primal emotion that it momentarily rendered him unrecognizable as the controlled patriarch who had engineered decades of emotional manipulation. The image burned into my memory as I accelerated away, a visual representation of the seismic shift that had just occurred, the carefully constructed family narrative cracked beyond repair by 3 pages of scientific data and 1 moment of absolute clarity. By the time I checked into a downtown Boston hotel 30 minutes later, my phone displayed 17 missed calls and 29 text messages, the digital equivalent of the explosion I detonated before walking away. I placed the room key on the desk, kicked off my heels, and finally allowed myself to review the communications, starting with Sophia's texts, which progressed from confusion. What just happened? What was in that envelope? To concern, Liz, please call me, everyone's freaking out. To information. Dad is saying insane things, Mom locked herself in her room, James is threatening legal action about the car. Mother's voice messages began composed but rapidly deteriorated. The first, a gentle, Eliza, please call home when you get a chance, evolving into her 5th message where her voice cracked with emotion. The test can't be right. There must be some mistake. Please come back so we can discuss this as a family. James had limited himself to 2 texts, both threatening legal action if I didn't return Dad's property immediately and retract your disgusting accusations. The contrast between my siblings' responses was unsurprising, their reactions perfectly aligned with the roles they'd always played in the family dynamic. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, phone in hand, the physical and emotional distance from the reunion already allowing me to process events with surprising clarity. The paternity test had confirmed what some deep, intuitive part of me had perhaps always known, that Richard Matthews wasn't my biological father, that the emotional distance he'd maintained throughout my life stemmed from knowledge he'd carried, but never acknowledged. I had obtained the test on impulse after discovering through a recreational genetic testing service that my supposed paternal genetic markers didn't align, the initial shock giving way to a strange sense of explanation. For a lifetime of felt otherness within my own family, now that the information was public, the carefully maintained family image was disintegrating in real time, decades of pretense collapsing under the weight of scientific fact. The most revealing response came nearly 2 hours later, after I had showered and changed into clothes from the overnight bag I'd packed in case the reunion became unbearable, a preparation that now seemed prescient. My phone rang with Sophia's number, and something in me needed to hear at least one family member's voice to confirm that the earthquake I'd triggered had actually occurred in the external world and not just within my own consciousness. Liz. Sophia's voice was hushed, suggesting she was calling from somewhere private within the house still filled with extended family. Are you okay? Where are you? The genuine concern in her tone nearly undid my hard-won composure. I'm safe. I answered noncommittally. What's happening there? She exhaled heavily. Chaos. Complete meltdown. After you left, Dad opened the envelope at the table in front of everyone, read it for like 30 seconds, then started shouting for Mom. She took one look at it and went completely white. They disappeared into his study for maybe 10 minutes, while everyone just sat there in shocked silence, and then Dad came storming out looking for you, saw the car was gone, and just lost it completely. I've never seen him like that, Liz. Never. The clinical description of events helped me maintain emotional distance, treating the situation almost like a business case study rather than my actual life imploding. And Mother? I asked, dreading but needing to know. She's locked herself in their bedroom, won't talk to anyone, not even James. The guests all left pretty quickly after that, as you can imagine. Dad's been making phone calls in his study for the last hour, and James is talking about some kind of injunction about the car, which honestly seems like the least important issue right now. She paused, lowering her voice further. Liz, is it true? The test results? Are they real? The question carried no judgment, only genuine desire to understand, so characteristic of Sophia's mediating nature. Yes, I confirmed simply. I had It done after a genetic service flagged inconsistencies. Richard Matthews is not my biological father. Saying the words aloud to a family member made them suddenly, viscerally real in a way that privately knowing hadn't. "Did you know who is?" she asked softly. "The test doesn't identify that, only confirms the negative match with the sample I provided from father's hairbrush," I explained, the technical details easier to discuss than the emotional implications. But given the timing and mother's reaction, I'm guessing it was someone from before she married father. Sophia was quiet for a moment before asking the question that revealed she understood the situation with her usual emotional intelligence. "How long do you think he's known?" The question cut to the heart of everything, the central betrayal not being the biological truth but the decades of emotional punishment for a circumstance beyond my control. "His entire life with me," I answered with certainty that surprised. "Even myself." "It explains everything, Sophia. Every criticism, every comparison, every impossible standard. He wasn't trying to make me better. He was punishing me for existing." The truth of this assessment settled between us, neither needing to articulate the countless examples that supported it. "I need to go," Sophia said suddenly. "James is coming upstairs, and I don't want him to know we're talking. Just please, text me that you're safe, wherever you are. And Liz? Whatever happens next, I love you exactly the same. This changes nothing between us." Her words lodged in my chest, the unexpected affirmation cracking the protective numbness I'd maintained since leaving the house. After hanging up, I moved to the hotel window overlooking Boston Harbor, the city lights reflecting on dark water, the view simultaneously familiar and strange, much like my own reflection in the glass. Somewhere in that city was the man who had shaped my childhood through calculated absence of affection, and potentially also the unknown man whose genetic material I carried. The symmetry of these two fathers, one present but emotionally absent, one completely unknown but biologically connected, created a strange sense of balance, as if the universe had finally provided explanation for the perpetual sense of misalignment I'd carried throughout my life. As midnight approached, a final text arrived from an unexpected source. Mother's private number rarely used for direct communication. "I never meant for you to find out this way. It wasn't an affair. There was someone before your father in college. When I discovered I was pregnant, your father offered to marry me anyway, to give you his name. Please believe he tried to love you as his own. Some men simply cannot separate their feelings from biology. I failed you both by pretending the truth. Didn't matter. Can we meet tomorrow? Just us? There's so much you deserve to know." The message confirmed what I had already intuited, but added layers of complexity I hadn't considered, casting my father simultaneously as both villain and victim of his own limitations. My mother as both deceiver and trapped young woman, making impossible choices in an era less forgiving than our own. I placed the phone on the nightstand without responding, emotional exhaustion finally overtaking the adrenaline that had carried me through the evening. Tomorrow would require decisions about how much truth I wanted, how much connection I could salvage or was worth salvaging, and what shape my life would take now that the central organizing principle of earning paternal approval had been definitively removed. For tonight, I allowed myself the luxury of emotional shutdown, of dreamless, sleep untroubled by the lifetime of questioning that had preceded this day of answers. The week following what my mind had categorized as the revelation unfolded with the strange dual quality of moving both excruciatingly slowly and dizzyingly fast, each day bringing new information that simultaneously clarified and complicated my understanding of my place in the world. The morning after my dramatic exit, I met Mother at a small cafe far from family haunts, her appearance shocking me with its vulnerability, the carefully maintained Matthews matriarch facade completely absent, replaced by a woman who looked both older and more authentically human than I'd ever seen her. "His name was Thomas Keller," she began without preamble once our coffee arrived, her fingers trembling slightly around the porcelain cup. "We met junior year at Wellesley. He was at MIT studying engineering. Brilliant, kind, completely wrong. For a girl from my background according to my parents. When they discovered our relationship, they forbade it immediately. 2 months later, I met your father at a charity function, the appropriate match everyone approved. The story unfolded like a period film. A young woman pressured to abandon genuine connection for social advancement, discovering her pregnancy only after the relationship had been forcibly ended. Richard Matthews offering marriage partly from genuine affection and partly from calculated assessment of how Caroline's family connections would benefit his business ambitions. "He promised to raise you as his own," Mother explained, her eyes focused on some middle distance where the past still lived. "And I believe he truly intended to keep that promise. But from the moment you were born, you had Thomas's eyes, his expressions, his way of questioning everything rather than simply accepting what was told to you. Richard tried in his way, but every time he looked at you, he saw another man's child, physical proof of my life before him." The revelations continued over 3 hours, details of a history I'd never suspected unfolding with painful clarity, explaining the family dynamic that had shaped my existence. My biological father had never known about me, had moved to California, after graduation, built a successful engineering firm, married, had 3 children who were technically my half-siblings. Mother had tracked his life from afar through alumni newsletters and, in recent years, social media, but never contacted him, honoring the promise made to Richard that the past would remain buried, that I would be a Matthews in name if not in blood. By our 3rd coffee, we had progressed to the most difficult question. "Why didn't you ever protect me?" I asked, the accumulated hurt of decades compressing into this single query. "You saw how he treated me compared to James and Sophia. You watched him systematically undermine every achievement, every attempt to earn his approval. How could you let that continue for 30 years? Her face crumpled with a grief so raw it momentarily overrode my anger. "I failed you," she acknowledged, no excuses offered. "Each time I considered telling you the truth, revealing why he couldn't give you what you deserved, the moment seemed wrong, the potential damage too great. Then time passed, and the lie grew larger, harder to correct. I told myself you were strong, resilient, that you were building a life independent of his approval. I didn't realize until yesterday how much that pursuit still drove you." The conversation ended with no neat resolution, only the beginning of a more honest relationship that would require years to rebuild on truthful foundation. The following day brought another seismic shift when I received an email from Thomas Keller, my biological father, responding to the message I'd sent after confirming his identity through public records. His reply was cautious but kind, expressing shock at learning of my existence, requesting time to process this information, but also genuine interest in connecting when he had absorbed the reality of a daughter he'd never known existed. "I see from your email signature that you work in finance in New York," he wrote in his initial response. "Ironically, I'll be in Manhattan next month for a conference. Perhaps we could meet for coffee if you feel comfortable doing so." The simple acknowledgement of my professional identity without qualification or comparison operated like a balm on raw emotional wounds, the neutral respect of his tone suggesting possibilities for connection untainted by the complex Matthews history. While these personal earthquakes reshuffled my understanding of family, the professional world continued turning with pragmatic indifference to my existential crisis. My boss called midweek with questions about a client presentation, the normalcy of work discussions providing surprising comfort amid personal chaos. "The Richardson account needs your risk assessment model explained in person," she informed me. "They're specifically requesting you by name, Eliza. Your reputation is growing." The acknowledgement of professional value independent of family connections reinforced what should have been obvious all along, that my worth existed separate from the Matthews name or approval, anchored in abilities and character entirely my own. Richard made his first direct contact 6 days after the reunion via his attorney, a coldly formal letter requesting return of the Mercedes and threatening legal action regarding defamatory statements made in public regarding paternity. The contrast between this response and Thomas's cautious but humane email crystallized everything I needed to know about both men, genetics suddenly seeming far less relevant than character in determining true parentage. I instructed my own attorney to arrange return of the vehicle while making clear that DNA evidence was, by definition, not defamatory. James maintained radio silence, his loyalty to father unsurprising given their genuine biological connection and shared worldview. Sophia, however, called daily, our relationship deepening through honest conversations about family dynamics we'd both observed, but never previously discussed openly. He's been controlling the narrative our entire lives, she observed during one late-night call, making us compete for approval that was never equally available. I benefited from that system, but I always saw how it hurt you. I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you more. Her acknowledgement helped heal wounds I hadn't realized still festered, the validation of my experience from someone who had witnessed it firsthand, oddly more powerful than any test result could be. 6 months after the revelation, the landscape of my life had transformed in ways both subtle and profound. Weekly therapy sessions helped untangle the complex web of conditional love and performance anxiety that had driven my achievements, allowing me to recognize genuine accomplishment separate from desperate approval seeking. My relationship with Mother evolved into something more authentic, her careful performance of perfection abandoned in favor of honest, sometimes painful conversations about choices, consequences, and the complex love that had always existed beneath the Matthews family. Theater. I met Thomas Keller for the first time at a quiet restaurant near Central Park. The strange experience of seeing my own expressions and mannerisms mirrored in a man I'd never met both unsettling and oddly comforting. You have my mother's analytical mind, he observed over dessert, hours into a conversation that flowed with surprising ease. But that spark when you talk about market patterns, that's apparently from my side. Our relationship developed cautiously, both respectful of its unusual beginning, neither expecting immediate father-daughter closeness, but building connection, through shared intellectual interests and discovery of genetic commonalities that explained lifelong traits I'd never seen reflected in the Matthews family. The final piece of this transformed life mosaic fell into place at Thanksgiving, when I accepted Sophia's invitation to dinner at her home rather than the traditional gathering at our parents' estate. Richard had declined to attend when informed of my presence, his continued rejection now producing more pity than pain, his limitations increasingly apparent as my own healing progressed. He can't change, Sophia explained as we prepared dessert together, her children playing in the next room with her husband. Not won't. Genuinely can't. His entire identity is built around certainties that your existence challenges. The observation carried no judgment, simply recognition of the immovable reality we'd both accepted. After dinner, Mother called, her voice stronger than I remembered from childhood, the performative perfection replaced by authentic engagement. I'm proud of you, Eliza, she said simply. Not for your job or your address or anything you've achieved, though those things are remarkable. I'm proud of who you are, your resilience, your capacity to build truth from deception. I should have said that every day of your life. The words I'd sought from Richard for 3 decades, freely given by the parent who had always loved me despite her flaws, landed with healing force precisely because they came without conditions or qualifications. As I ended the call, I realized the most profound truth of this 6-month journey, that family transcended genetics and legal definitions, comprising instead those who saw you clearly and loved you anyway, who honored your authentic self rather than demanding performance of assigned roles. The luxury car I'd purchased as desperate offering to a father figure who could never truly accept me had been reclaimed and subsequently sold, the funds invested in my future rather than squandered on illusory approval. More importantly, I had reclaimed the emotional energy previously exhausted on an unwinnable quest for validation, redirecting it toward relationships that nourished rather than depleted, toward work undertaken for passion rather than proof of worth, toward building a life measured by internal fulfillment rather than external recognition. The journey from that fateful family dinner to this new equilibrium hadn't been linear or simple, each day bringing fresh challenges and occasional setbacks, but the trajectory remained consistently toward healing rather than further damage. Perhaps the most meaningful measure of growth came not from grand revelations, but from quiet Tuesday mornings when I awoke without immediately assessing my worthiness, when accomplishments were celebrated for their intrinsic value rather than their potential to finally earn paternal approval, when life was lived from authentic foundation rather than performative desperation. As this Thanksgiving evening ended, I realized that while the mystery of my paternity had been solved, the more significant discovery was that its importance had diminished with each step toward self-acceptance. The question of whose blood I carried mattering far less than whose values I chose to embody, whose love I accepted as genuine, whose truth I claimed as my own. Have you ever discovered that your true family isn't always defined by blood? Sometimes the people who should love us unconditionally are the ones who hurt us most deeply. I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below about how you've created your own chosen family or stood up to those who couldn't see your worth. If my story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to hear more journeys of healing, and share with someone who might need to be reminded that their value doesn't depend on anyone else's validation. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes taking back your power means walking away from people who never deserved it in the first place.